The military history of the United States is lost in the South Pacific. We showed yesterday. You can witness how the team looked for the wreck of the USS Hornet. The Japanese sank the aircraft carrier in October 1942. For more than 70 years, no one knew what happened to the USS Hornet after it went missing in 1942. Became a puzzle that couldn't be solved. A lot of people assumed she had been swept up by the Pacific Ocean and would never be seen again. But technology brings ghosts back into the public view in some way. When you put an underwater drone into the abyss, it seemed like history itself woke up when the inconceivable was caught on camera. What it is, uncovered left many experienced historians scared and amazed to look into further. Can this ghost ship that has sunk still? Stories that have never been told waiting to be found. You can only understand what the cameras found if you know what happened in the past. The Hornet wasn't destroyed like most ships. In her short life, she became a legend, and all of her wreck's rivets keeps that memory. Let's go back to where we started, the false belief that gone. The USS Hornet's arrival wasn't planned, but the story didn't start off that way. Without a ceremony, they were added to the Navy list. She was by December 1940, launched from the yards in Newport News, Virginia, and by the next October, she was already in commission. The newest Yorktown class, CV-8, was her official name, aircraft carrier. Her lines were similar to those of the ships that came before her, Enterprise and Yorktown. The Hornet was thin and fast, through the water, and strong enough to carry an air wing that may change the course of a war. Not many at the time. She knew how soon she would have to take the test. She was put on trial by fire just a few months after the U.S. joined World War I. 6-0. Hornet was chosen for something that seemed impossible in April 1942. She was made to bring American bombers near enough to Tokyo to be a danger. The idea to send off Army B-25 bombers, a carrier's short deck, seemed sloppy. We measured every ounce of weight, made the fuel tanks bigger, and the sailors were told that their chances of living were very low. But on the morning of April 18th, 16 bombers took off from the deck of the Hornet. It was the attack on Doolittle. There wasn't much physical damage in Japan, but the psychological damage was huge. Japan's home islands were at war for the first time, and Americans felt hope for the first time since the attack on Pearl Harbor come back. But this was only the beginning. Hornet was at sea by June 1942, into the Battle of Midway, which was one of the most crucial naval battles in history. She joined the Yorktown and Enterprise in fighting back against the Japanese carrier fleet. Her aircraft teams rushed into the fighting to help the 4 Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, and then Hiryu. Hornet's planes also attacked the cruiser Mikuma. The Japanese left. Halfway through, Japan's naval momentum was stopped, and because of this, the balance of power in the Pacific changed. It was another notch in Hornet's record, which was growing quickly. But there was always a hefty cost for maritime victories, and that cost was just around the corner. The battle for Guadalcanal went on day and night as the ship moved into the Solomons. For weeks, Hornet was in charge, the sole U.S. carrier in the area, and her pilots are always attacking Japanese ships and planes. Living on board was so unyielding. Every time they launched or rescued a damaged plane, the crew was reminded that their ship was anything that kept the enemy from getting to the Americans on the islands. The Hornet had turned into she was a workhorse during the Pacific War, but her luck didn't last long. The truth came to the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands in October 1942. Japanese torpedo planes and bombers that dive attacked the Hornet and never stopped. She was hit over and over again until her deck caught fire and made the equipment stop. Her crew tried to save her, but the damage was too bad. Right away, the ship was abandoned when American warships tried to blow it up with torpedoes, but the Hornet fought against going down. The next day, Japanese destroyers surrounded the area and gave her the last blows that made her fall. Her career lasted barely 16 months. Hornet had done one of the most daring strikes in history during that short time, which led to a victory that changed the Pacific, and fought until she was too tired to go on. She was the last person to get 4 battle stars. An American fleet carrier will sink if enemy fire hits it. This record alone made sure that she will be remembered in history. But what she left, there was something far bigger behind. It's one thing to know that a ship is out there. Finding it in a big, unpredictable, and secretive ocean is a whole different story. But somewhere in that shadow, some determined people thought they could find her. But could they really find her? How they hunted, looked. For a long time, all there was about the Hornet were stories and old pictures. Everyone knew it was lost in the Pacific. But where and in what situations? No diver had ever come close, and no submarine had ever made the trip. The ocean is really deep, and it held onto the Hornet for 70 long years, never letting go. It wouldn't come back. A lot of people assumed the carrier would be lost forever. But that changed when a new group of explorers set out to find it. This is not what treasure hunters did. It was what those who wanted to bring back the voice of history wanted. The team at Vulcan, led by Paul Allen, put in the work. The same crew that found other famous wrecks, Inc. Their search. The purpose of petrol was not to be a luxury item or a source of fame. It was made to look for stories under the sea. They also assumed that the Hornet was waiting. The crew didn't start at sea. They started on land. They looked through old Navy documents, logbooks, after-action reports, and survivor statements were all reviewed against each other since every clue was essential. 9. After seeing the Hornet in her last hours, each warship wrote down its coordinates, bearings, and radar. Notes and rough sketches of the war. Putting all of those pieces together made a complicated web of numbers and guessing. There was some truth in that combination. They looked at each other for months, comparing one log to the next, repairing small errors, and taking drift into account, differences in compasses. They made detailed maps that showed areas where the Hornet might have crashed, based on ocean currents and the carrier's possible movement before it sank. It looked like a mix of science and instinct. Every decision they make might either make the quest easier or start it all over again. So, no one couldn't afford to be wrong. As soon as the maps were ready, the technology took control. Advanced sonar equipment that ran on gasoline scanned the ocean floor and sent back sound waves that made a picture of what was below. When the operators saw readings like these, they would look for anything that would make the surface rough of the bottom of the ocean. Down there, one curve might change everything, but the sonar could only see so much. To find out what was really under there, the crew utilized robotic explorers called the AUVs, or Autonomous Underwater Vehicles, and ROVs, or Remote-Controlled Vehicles. These devices were made to handle any pressure that may shatter steel. They had cameras, sonar, and other equipment, and sensors that can find their way around in complete darkness. They have motion tracking and sound placement, which lets them carefully made their way through the murky water, scanning the whole area they had chosen. At that depth, more than 17,000 feet, normal machines can't handle pressure. Any mistake could imply losing either the vehicle or, even worse, losing sight of a target. The flow of were unpredictable, and the pressure would destroy everything that wasn't totally sealed. But the group was ready with backups, extra parts, and experienced workers. It has to be perfect. On its first big dive, one of the underwater vehicles picked up something. The sonar results suggest that there was a kind. It was weak at the same time. It couldn't have formed on its own since it was too massive and well organized. The texts showed that the edges of a long, flat surface were getting higher. Dimensions that are only possible for a battleship. Is it possible? Be the Hornet after all these years? Or did it lose another wreck too? In the past? The group was excited, but they couldn't celebrate yet. The crew needed proof and a full confirmation. The ROV went around the object many times and shot it from all sides. At first, it wasn't easy, because the footage is dark, grainy, and has silt and time clouds in it. After that, the shapes began to take shape. They looked for indications like gun mounts, catapult tracks, and the broken island that used to be the bridge. The proof started to come together bit by bit. They compared each photo to Hornet designs, which include things like the slant of the bow and the spacing of the anti-aircraft weaponry, including the cut in the flight deck. Every match added a new piece to the puzzle. If an 8 was found on that would be pretty certain proof, right? Almost right away. The team was ready to go deeper so they could acquire a better video of the crash on the ocean floor. Now, this is the end of the hunt and the beginning of the discovery. What surprised everyone was the object. When the explorers turned their cameras around the deck and observed the next thing, everyone stopped moving. With its barrel pointing up, a 5-inch gun turret stayed up but they were waiting for an order that would never come. The weapon had neither dropped or sank into the ground. It had heard a frozen echo of the fight that sank the Hornet. The cameras kept showing more. The 1.1. The anti-aircraft guns stayed where they were. Their cases, mounts, and the supports were in the same place as they were before the conflict. It didn't look like their arrangement was random. It looked like the squad had gone away for a time and never came back. The waves had not spread them out. It kept them in place. Then, behind the ghostly lights, there was a spectacle that seemed like it could have happened anywhere on land. But this graveyard of loneliness is so odd. It was a straight-up international harvester airplane tug, squared off and in perfect balance. The little tow vehicle stayed still, as if it was waiting for another plane to show up. Place. Even after being underwater for so long, its outlines were still clear. But that wasn't all. The researchers had to stop again because something else on the flight deck caught their attention. This was the wings of a Grumman F-4F Wildcat plane are still neatly folded. It was shocking to everyone that the Wildcat fighter was still alive. Seeing it there, unchanged, was like going back in time. In October 1942, the personal impacts of a person who was even more disturbing is still there inside. In one area of the wreck, a jacket hung quietly from a ledge, hatchway. In another, a wash kit still had an unbroken toothbrush in it. Seen from the inside, these items were not meant to be used in battle or operations. They were pieces of regular life, things that belonged to men who had written letters, laughed, or worried about the next thing. Hit. The team noticed that the ship seemed to be breathing as they dug deeper, and they could hear echoes of her past. On her hull, there remained a faint mark of a single 8. They couldn't believe it, but it confirmed what they already knew. This was the Hornet CV-8. This identifier did more than merely identify things. It was a real-life illustration of time itself, a slender thread that connects the present to the ship that helped start the Doolittle Raid and changed naval warfare. Past. We heard every detail of the story. The Hornet setup wasn't completely ruined. It was saved in only a few occasions. The damage was real and cruel, even though some portions were still whole, standing. Before the displays came up, the researchers realized that they were looking at more than simply a shipwreck. They were put at the entrance to a time capsule that can't be opened. With each frame, another question that hasn't been answered yet. What proportion of the ships? What was still inside? What mysteries might still be hidden in their sealed compartments? Also, what would they find if they went deeper? The riddle was still not solved. The Hornet had shown her face, but not her heart. And when the cameras moved around, there was one notion in our heads when we looked at those dark holes. What else may be down there waiting? Hasn't changed since 1942 analysis and understanding. As soon as the researchers' monitors displayed the first photographs of the wreck, the room became quiet. The thing they were looking at wasn't a pile of bent metal. It looked like the ship had been stuck in time. The USS Hornet kept her shape in many places, even if the pandemonium had sent her to the bottom of the Pacific. For a ship that was hit by bombs, torpedoes, and fire, she was almost unremarkable in how well she was kept. Like the ocean had chosen to stay incognito all these years. How do we now understand? And look at this. You see, the ship's condition told a story that few could have. Better than the sea itself when it comes to writing. Historical documents say that Hornet was assaulted many times on October 26th, 1942. She really went through 2 torpedoes, 3 bombs, and repeated dive bombing. Runs that made smoke and fire flood her decks. The wounds from that fight, which were now thousands of feet below, were still able to be seen. The hull twisted inward where the blasts landed. The plating folded in on itself like paper, and the bridge had come loose from the main building. These breaks weren't random. They showed how the ship had fought against gravity and water pressure until she couldn't anymore. The bridge also talked on its own. Narrative too, because it was bent and strangely upright, standing apart from the main body. Experts say that division meant more than just becoming worse. It didn't seem like Hornet had gone apart all at once in a violent way. Instead, she gave. Piece by piece as air pockets burst from the pressure and water flowed in. This kind of information turns an accident into a witness. To understand the importance of preserving Hornet, Researchers compared her to other wrecks from the conflict. People found the USS Lexington. It was made by the same group before, but it is now at a shallower depth and has a lot of pieces that are spread out all across the ocean floor. Hornet, on the other hand, is still mostly whole, even if under more stress and at a greater depth. She is special because she is different. She is not a mess of time. She is a time capsule and a steel memory, kept in freezing water for miles. The ruin is more than just an engineering marvel. Opened doors that records alone couldn't open. The Hornet's war journals make clear the effects of flooding and bombs, but the ruin shows exactly how the ship broke, cracked, and bent. The bending. Plates and shredded bulkheads show where the tension built up and how the hull finally gave way. It is comparable to what naval historians do, has a different group of witnesses. This time, though, steel was employed instead of ink. Forensic experts have begun, documenting every fracture and blast mark and looking at how different materials age in very cold and dark conditions. These specifics can help future engineers understand how ships act in similar situations. Science couldn't see this part of the narrative before, but each rivet and damaged seam shows it. But with each new discovery, a sad notion comes to mind, because the accident is also a grave. Since the Hornet was found again, every decision has been based on that. There were several sailors who never departed the ship. Their bodies were probably locked inside compartments that fell apart, which is why the site, a holy place. That changes the game for researchers. They don't want to rest and pay respect, not to heal. The Hornet is not part of history by itself. She is one of the people that never came back home. The wreck was mostly talks about both war and humanism. The guns, the plane, and the small things, once touched by human hands. It all comes together to make something bigger than a ship. Story. It shows that history isn't always written down. Sometimes it lies calmly beneath the waves, held onto, waiting for someone who is brave enough to look and calm enough to listen. The bent metal showed how the crew of the Hornet lived, but she did not. One man's memory of what really happened next is one that lived long enough to tell the world what he saw. The people that lived are the human part. Steel can't tell the stories that are hidden deep in the water where the Hornet lives. Some of them are still alive. Men used to walk on her decks. People like Richard Novatsky, whose, even after her engines stopped, memories kept the ship's heartbeat going. The world learned that the Hornet had been found when Richard was 95 years old. That was a lifetime away, in a way, from the sailor he was when he was 18 and everything went wrong. But when he talked about that day, he didn't seem far away. They came to life with thee. You can only get this kind of information by going through the chaos, confusion, and fear yourself. They used armor-piercing weapons, bombs. You can now hear them going down the decks. Plink, plink, plink. Later, when they explosion, making the ship shake. He talked of how explosions tore holes in the deck after deck, and how every blow made the ship shake. We recorded every sound and echo. It took over his thinking. Richard was facing a piece of his own past. The camera slowly moves across the seafloor, and he sees a gun mount right away. Accepted. He had been in this identical area before during Hornet's last stand, watching it there perfectly. It was like seeing time open its hand after being kept safe under miles of water. For a guy who had survived what many others had not, it wasn't simply about finding. It was a gathering. Also, even though the situation was serious, Novatsky's spirit didn't not lose its shine. Go down to my locker and get $40. You can. He said it as a joke. That little bit of humor broke through the sadness to show that even humor can still exist even when people are sad. But there was a truth beneath the smile. Didn't have to say it out loud. The kind that stays between sailors and ghosts. The story of the Hornet isn't just about finding things out. It's also one of letting go of something. About 140 crew members never made it back home. After the last day of October 1942, the fire took their lives, water as well as steel's fall. Even though it has been preserved, the wreck is a grave. We might call it a place where tragedy and bravery are always connected. The wreck's discoveries gave the survivors and their families something they had been missing for almost 70 years. Finalization. The Hornet was no longer lost. She had a bed to sleep in. The soldiers who never came back were with her. To the U.S. Navy, Hornet is still a symbol of courage and hard work. It was the ship that began the attack on Doolittle, a mission that pushed war to Japan's doorstep when few thought it could happen. 2. Historians say she is a living time capsule that demonstrates the cost of war in terms of people and equipment behind it. As the mission's video spread throughout the world, it stirred something very human. A lot of the professors were too young to have seen the war, but what they observed on their screens. It was no longer only about engineering and discovery. It focused on the quiet dignity of people who they fought and lost. The sea was quiet, so their narrative was secure. It had become both a guardian and a witness. Even though this finding made people feel and respected the mission, it wasn't without its perils. Finding a ship almost 3 miles below it wasn't easy for the ocean surface to do its job. It needed courage, precision, and have faith in the unknown. How could you reach her? What risks did the crew have to deal with, face in search of a ghost under the sea? The story goes on from there. Problems and risks with technology. Looking inside the wreck of the USS Hornet wasn't a simple historical fall. It was a high-stakes fight to fight a universe that people can't get to. More than. At 17,000 feet below the surface, the ocean is hardly a calm blue dream. It's a harsh, crushing pressure zone where one mistake might undo years of work in only a few seconds. Down there, the circuits break, the steel bends, and no one can come to the help. The first hurdle was to get through that stress. The weight of the water above at some depths is more than 8 tons per square inch. The bolt, wire, and joint on the submersible had to be stable, or it could be crushed. Engineers looked at titanium shells and pressure housings over and over, knowing that one mistake may end the expedition. Even the little rubber caulks that protect the electronics must be flawless. A single drop of seawater might short out an entire control system. The more carefully they planned, the line between exploration and disaster grew less clear the deeper one went. Another danger that wasn't obvious was navigation. The GPS stopped working right away when the automobile went under the surface. There were no highs or lows, no chart, and no light. The team employed sound waves, beacons, and an inertial sensor network to find their way. Their sonar was the only way to find their way was to shoot sound waves into the dark to display the small shapes of the Hornets below. Silty layers. Every sonar ping in the dark felt like a heartbeat, showing that they were still alive and on course even though they were at a place that was supposed to block all signals. On a separate level, another problem was talking to each other. It took precious seconds for each command sent from the ship above to reach Every video feed had to fight its way through miles of thick water while it was underwater. The photographs came damaged and blazing through shadows and static, but not right away. When the signal went away, the operators on deck were still waiting for the water to bring back their robot while they look at blank screens. Because of the weight, every move is a leap of faith. Also, the risks weren't just electronic. They were also dangerous in a physical way. The Hornet's wreck was torn apart by time and battle were a maze of sharp-edged rubble and broken timbers. One wrong move could shatter a propeller or get caught in a cable. Gentle currents could modify the ocean floor even there. Car and push it dangerously close to the remains of the wreck. Every move has to be intentional, considering every inch in relation to possible danger. Keep in mind, down there, the ocean doesn't grant second chances. The organization did this to lower the chance of failure. Made arrangements for what to do in case of practically anything. They developed backup plans for cameras, electricity, navigation, and communication. The engineers knew they couldn't immediately go fix it if something went wrong. Repairs needed accuracy, creativity, and distance. They practiced these situations over and over until when a team member fails, they might operate as muscle memory. It was accuracy under pressure, not just from the sea, but because they knew that one mistake could jeopardize the goal for good. The environment added to their worries. The intense cold, which is almost freezing down there, might drain batteries in half the time. Even alloys, meant to last, began to break down in the dark, salty air. There was a layer of deep sea life on the wreck, energy that made it slippery and hard to predict. Everything, from the cables and propellers to even the robotic arms, had to deal with the pressure of being exposed for a long time. And now, let's talk about the human side. which was incredibly hard. These expeditions went on for days or even weeks under very rigorous rules, routines, and not getting enough sleep. The crew of the research ship had to work in tight quarters, which made them nervous, skinny from being fatigued and focusing too much. Every decision had consequences. Every time they sent the sub down, they were betting against time, pressure, and distance. There was no room for faults that weren't careful deeds or silent promises. Still, success has its own risks. Some parts of the Hornet must be kept since it is seen as a war grave, not changed out of respect for the folks who died there. Engineers had to check that their sonar pulses and propeller wash wouldn't knock down fragile buildings or harm the sediment. Every move had to find a balance between being respectful and being curious. There isn't a museum that shows the ocean floor. It is a place to relax, and every action was crucial. What comes next now that the past has been honored? What does this discovery mean? What do they mean for history, future research, and the effects and importance for us? The U.S. Navy and Vulcan Inc. officially confirmed that the ship was found deep in the South Pacific. Was, in reality, the USS Hornet, but there was no great announcement or news coverage. It was done in a quiet voice, almost like they were conveying news to the past itself. The Navy said the ship was about 17,500 feet deep and close to Solomon Island. But there was still one important thing that was hidden: the exact. Only a small number of people would know where the wreck was. The choice has nothing to do with being mysterious. It was about being safe. That careful balancing act between respect and exploration formed anything that happened next. The find was a gold mine for historians, engineers, and preservationists. A lot of information. It was like getting a handbook from time itself for naval architects. Museums began to look into ways to transmit this story to the public through interactive exhibits, detailed 3D models, and virtual dives that allow people to experience the Hornet without having to leave their homes. But the discovery changed how people thought about what was possible, in addition to the science and statistics. For a long time, adventurers, they thought that ships that went down to such destruction were gone forever. But the Hornet's rediscovery ruined that conviction. It showed that the impossible depths could be reached with the right mix of technology, hard work, and courage. Could be reached. There was a lot of responsibility that came with discovering the Hornet, of course. The wreck is officially recognized as a U.S. Navy war burial, so it should be treated with the same respect as any other graveyard. The submerged. The Military Craft Act protects it from unwanted retrieval or research. No. You can take artifacts. There is no means to go into locked rooms, and no propeller can move the silt that resided there for a long time. The Navy still protects her, even though she may have been lost at sea. Modern surveillance. Mechanisms now protect the site from theft and accidental harm. The whole thing also has a very humble feel about it. Seeing the Hornet for the first time after many years stirs a sense of awe. It shows how smart and weak people can be. We can make devices that can reach the bottom of the ocean, yet we still can't fight nature's power. The sea took one of the most famous American carriers. But after all this time, she stays there, showing us that no narrative is ever completely lost. As history currently, the question remains in the thoughts of all explorers as it rises from the void. How? How far are we willing to go to find out more about what the water has to say? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. To enjoy. To watch more videos like this, click on the next one in your music folder.